Hello, Professor. Today I will be presenting on the subject of Vaqueros. I am in Group 1. This is going to be one of the many of the topics we discuss on today's presentation. So I wanted to give a timeline of Vaqueros from 1519 all the way down to today. So starting from 1519 to the 1700s, after the Spanish arrived in Mexico in 1519, ranches were established and stocked with cattle and horses imported from Spain. Landowners mounted native Indians on well-trained horses and taught them to handle cattle by the early 1700s. Cattle ranching had spread north into what is now Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico, and also south to Argentina. The native cowboys were called vaqueros, which is also the Spanish word for cowboys, and developed roping skills using braided rawhide rayetas. With a good horse, a vaquero was efficient. With a good rayeta, he was invincible. The rayeta was a vaquero's greatest source of pride. He made both his living and his reputation by how well he could throw it from the back of a galloping horse. It wasn't his horse, but his rayeta that the vaquero protected first when the rains came. Often stuffing it down his shirt to keep it dry and warm, vaqueros were so particular about their long and limber robes that they often made their own in a time-consuming process of cutting, shaving, wetting, stretching, drying, greasing, and braiding strips of cowhide. When a vaquero had mastered tossing the hoop, the rayeta became an extension of his arm and was as effective in bringing down a cow as a cattle rustler. Starting in 1769, a chain of 21 Franciscan missions eventually stretched from San Diego to San Francisco, marking the beginning of California's livestock industry. I will now be presenting a video of a vaquero versus a Texas cowpuncher to show the different variations of what a cowboy is like in our current times.
Jingling the horses, the morning's dark as night. The cowboss is ready to work horse. Wagons coming in sight. Grab your biscuits and coffee. Saddle up, old bear. The cowboss is mounted and ready. It's going to be a long day. You've got to go a long way.
There are two major cowboy influences in the West, California and Texas. The Californios followed in the footsteps of the Spanish vaqueros who lived in California. Texas traditions evolved from the Texas vaqueros as well as from the stock keepers who migrated from South Carolina. This merger created the Texas cowboy.
The California vaquero was very high in their status amongst their peers. These guys showed the pride, so with them came this stateliness.
There's a saying out in California, it takes as long as it takes. While there's quite a bit of truth in that, there's times you don't have the luxury of having that much time. I think about something my daddy said all the time when I was growing up. He would tell me, he'd say, hurry every time you think about it and keep it on your mind.
If the Californios saying is, takes as long as it takes. This idea that a buckaroo is that laid back, shouldn't we all be? Shouldn't we all just enjoy a little more time on everything we do?
We'd sit down there at the wagon to eat breakfast. He'd sit down there and he'd say, get that in you, boy, and let's go. There's a rush or a hurry in this country that you don't see out there. And a lot of it, I believe, is to beat the heat, because we have a lot of hot weather here quite a bit of the year. It's not very conducive to working cattle.
They'll prowl. They do a lot of prowling. We call the big field. We don't ride in fields. Well, we do. It might be 1,000,000 acres in that field, but we call it the big field. Why? I don't know.
What we call gentle cattle, a lot of folks might not call gentle. You couldn't walk out and pet one of them. And the cattle in this country, they might trot off or might run from you, but if you could get around them and get them held up and worked, we'd say they're gentle.
The cattle out in Nevada, the buckaroos are out there all the time with them.
But most of that, that country's big and open and quite a little easier to get to cattle than than it was down here. They gather all those cattle in the fall and they, feed them all winter, so they're around people quite a bit. Where these cows run out year round and they might not see man once or twice a year. When you go to catch something in town, you intend to go get them. Guys dally, they're not really committed, I don't think. And I always tease them. I say, yeah, you dally guys, get out there and catch something, and if things come pretty tight, everything's not just right and looks like not going to work out real good, you just turn your little rope loose. I said, y'all ain't got no good stories to tell.
When I see a bunch of guys coming in and that rope's tied to their horn, you're in trying to get cattle worked and stuff, I think to myself, man, when it comes time to let go of your rope, I can do it to keep somebody else from getting in a wreck. Those guys can't. And so consequently, there's some wilder times.
Hook that thing on there and see what happens. If you live through it, well, you might have a good story to tell.
My dad he would just take the rope, and before I could ever rope a calf, he'd just start walking with that rope, and I was supposed to keep my horse in check, and I was supposed to have the coils in my hand, and I was supposed to dally without looking with my thumb up, and it was just walked through, and it was pushed through, and I didn't even get out there and rope a bale without having to come back and dally. It became second nature with that type of roping.
First time I ever saw anyone dally, there was a cow jumped out of these pens, and I don't remember now who it was, but I know they had a grass rope and just a little 2-rope horn, built a loop right quick, and it didn't take time to hook that horn knot on there. They roped that cow and went trying to dally that little short rope on that slick horn, because it just lost the rope, I looked down at Daddy and he said, "You see there what that damn dallying's good for?" So I kind of grew up with a negative opinion of dallying from way back there.
Now we'll be moving on to the mid-1700s to 1820s. Livestock production flourished in California and the Southwest, but few markets existed for end products such as meat, hides, and tallow. By the mid-1700s, long trains of pack mules would transport these products to Mexico City and return with supplies. American ships began servicing California ports in the early 1800s and traded for the same materials. For the first time, ranchers had local markets for their animals. Huge roundups were held to collect cattle, and the hard-riding vaqueros controlled the chaos. Known for expert horsemanship and roping skills, vaqueros were said to only dismount for a chance to dance with pretty girls. The work of riding, roping, and herding meant long days and nights in the saddle. But when roundups and trail drives were over, vaqueros relaxed and had fun. By riding and roping some more, gatherings in open fields, they competed against each other by racing horses and performing rope tricks, all to determine who was the most skilled. They leapt from horses to wrestle down a steer. They raced the clock for the shortest time to rope a calf and the longest time to stay on a bucking horse. They competed to keep their skills sharp and their reputations polished. Over time, crowds gathered to watch and cheer the vaqueros for their amazing feats. Vaqueros had been herding and driving cattle and wild horses for hundreds of years. By the time they became part of the Texas ranching landscape, the vaqueros were so renowned for their skills that rancher Richard King traveled to Mexico in 1854 to recruit entire vaquero families to manage his herds. King knew that these Mexican cowboys knew what to do with horses and cattle much better than he did. Seasoned vaqueros could stop a horse in its tracks or send it into a flat-out gallop with the slightest sway of the reins. The cowboys understood the social structure of cattle herds so well that they knew just where to look for the hiding strays. Their roping, riding, and ranching knowledge was unsurpassed. The king fed and housed the entire vaquero community on his ranch and paid the cowboys a monthly wage. Boys and girls went to a ranch school until they were old enough to learn to be a vaquero or vaquera. These families became known as Los Guineños, also known as the King's People. And through generations of service, they revolutionized the cattle business and helped build the King Ranch into the legend it is today. Now we'll be moving on to the early and mid-1800s. Ranching ceased to be a strictly Hispanic profession as more Americans poured into once Mexican-held lands, especially after the Mexican-American War in 1846 through 1848. The Anglo newcomers adapted to the vaquero style, and many settlers intermarried with the old Spanish ranching families. The 1849 gold rush brought even more people to California, which increased the demand for beef. Californios rode ponies that had been trained into a hackamore, swung a big loop with their hand-braided rawhide rayetas, and took a rap called a dally around high saddle horns for leverage when roping cattle. And now we'll be moving on to the late 1800s. As the livestock industry expanded, these horsemen found work in Oregon, Idaho, Nevada, Arizona, and Hawaii. Taking their equipment and livestock handling techniques with them, cowboys in Oregon, Idaho, and Nevada remained strongly Hispanic. The term buckaroo actually comes from the word vaquero, including the use of center fire rigged saddle, in which rigging is situated below the center point of the saddle, a long rayeta, and silver mounted spade bits. Trail driving Texans adopted many of their techniques from Mexican vaqueros, carrying their methods with them north through the plain states and leading into a subculture of single, itinerant men who worked at ranches. Now I will be presenting a video on modern day vaqueros.
Somewhere around the 1600s, Spaniards came into Texas. They were excellent horsemen and developed a ranching industry. By 1830, there were some very well-established ranches. Alonso de León, José Antonio Navarro, Juan Seguín, Bernardo Gutiérrez de Lara, José de Escandón, and all these guys had some very, very large spreads that they handled with vaquero team.
La gente para allá para el sur para cortar las vacas y los becerros.
The vaqueros taught the Anglos about cowboy. When the Anglos came into Texas in 1830, they had those little British riding saddles, no saddle horn. They came in and they see these vaqueros that have their saddles, they have the tapaderas that cover their feet so they protect them from the brush. They had the chaps, the chivarras, to protect their legs.
Vaqueros came from the word vaca, a Spanish word for cow. And the bandana was used not only to keep you warm in winter around your neck, but to wipe down your sweat and sometimes your blood as well.
A lot of people, they just call it a whip. You know, we call it chicote. It's a braided nylon or rawhide whip. We use a lot of that for cattle pen work, driving cows. You know, they get scared of the crack of the whip. Once you crack that whip, they start moving away from you. There are not very many people that use whips on horseback anymore.
They have the 2 notches on top, the 1 notch on the side. That's a Renato Ramirez cow. We branded with a rocking R. That's a Renato Ramirez cow.
We castrate calves. They gain weight faster once they're castrated. You know that they'll gain 100 pounds, 150 pounds a month. If you leave them as bulls, what happens is they just start, you know, messing around, jumping on each other, losing weight, running around. So that's why we do a lot of castration.
After castrating those calves, we brought the mountain oysters to the grill and we cooked those. They're pretty much, I guess, from farm to table, what they say. These came from the pens to the grill. We just washed them down with a little water and they just grilled them as plain as you can see. The hot sauce, we roasted tomatoes, roasted peppers, and we just put them in that big morcajete, which is a grinding stone, and just, you know, grind it up. We had to make some adjustments because the first time was a little bit too spicy, too hot, so we calmed it down a little, added more tomatoes. We had a traditional carne guisada, which is a beef stew, charro beans, and we made some pan de campo, which is cowboy bread. And we cook them all in cast iron.
We do a lot of day work together, you know, and we have fun doing it. You know, he's my brother-in-law, so he needs help, he'll come help me, or I need help. You know, so it's back and forth, you know, and then our kids grow up doing it. That's why we really do it. It's more of a family deal.
As long as cattle are raised in big American pastures, the legacy of the vaquero will endure. The early Mexican techniques for handling cattle can be seen throughout the modern livestock industry, like whenever a cowboy cinches a saddle on his horse, straps on chaps, competes in a rodeo, or ropes a horse from his remuda. Even branding migrated north from Mexico on the Pacific coast and on Nevada ranches. Buckaroos still carry long ropes, but now those materials are made from nylon. And they also ride slick fork saddles and use silver-mounted spade bits and spurs. You'll find vaqueros still flinging a rope around a cow or horse somewhere in Texas, California, the Big Sky Country, and other parts of the U.S. They may be riding in trucks or helicopters and wearing baseball caps these days,